Namaste and welcome to another episode of Itihasdhir. The book we'll be discussing today is called A Brief History of Science in India and it is written by Dr. Sabareesh. Namaste and welcome, Dr. Sabareesh. Welcome to Itihasdhir and
Namaste,
thank you
Aditya.
so much for giving us your time to discuss your book.
Thank you for inviting me, first of all, and my many best wishes for your initiative, for your podcasts, upcoming and current ones.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
sir. So, first of all, let's start from the beginning. What motivated you to undertake a project on the history of science in India, from that too from an Indic civilizational lens? And how did your training in science policy at JNU inform this intellectual pursuit?
So, firstly, like right from my childhood, I was very much interested in science. So, the curiosity towards science was always there. And during my college times, and also, of course, during my school times, we always used to hear certain information from our mothers, from our grandparents about home remedies. Like, no, instead of having uh, allopathic medicine, there was always a time when healing used to happen at home itself. That was my first experience with Indic science or Bharatiya science. So the interest started from there, and gradually through the academics, I came to know about several aspects of Indian science which had its origin in India and which later on it went abroad, and that's how it made the round tripping. So, moreover, above that, if we see Indic culture is one thing that is more scientific. If we see starting from the Harappan civilization, the Vedic civilization, everything which we do has a scientific foundation. You see the architectural style, you see the way of our diet, we see our Vastu Shastra, we see the monsoon readings, agriculture, anything you see, there is always a scientific lineage or approach is always scientific in that. So that is something which attracted me. And we have our own way of predicting things, our own way of experimenting with things. And that was even more motivating. And that is how like and once I joined JNU, my center was like Center for Studies in Science Policy. There we came to know, we read about history of science. So that was even more interesting, and because it matched my interests, and the center was also having good amount of books in the library. So in exploring all those things, I thought, no, this project is very much essential. It was there since my childhood days, but to write a book on that, no, the idea actually came to reality when I joined JNU. It was a great happening. Uh,
Aditi, we can't hear you.
yeah, muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So, you define science within the Bharatiya epistemological context, especially given that traditional Indian knowledge systems do not always end up in the Western disciplinary categories. So, how do you go ahead with this?
This was one of my favorite questions, very important questions as well. We say that the Eastern and the Western philosophies are different, the culture is different, the civilizational pursuits are different. What is the basis of this? And if we see philosophy is something that forms the fundamental bedrock of every studies. So I must definitely say that the philosophical foundations of the Western civilization and the philosophical foundations of the Eastern civilization, they are quite unique, quite different. I would also add on that the Eastern civilizations are more dynamic. If we see the Western philosophies, they have one singular static approach towards not only science, but also towards social science. Empiricism or empirical research is one major and biggest way that the Western philosophies approach. But in India, in Bharatiya tradition, there is also a context or a concept called perceiving. perception, not necessarily that everyone who perceives the same as such what others perceive. So that makes us more broad in philosophical approach. I would say that it's not just empirical research that is there in the Indian context, but there are several other aspects of experimenting, about perceiving, about thinking, about hypothesizing. It's there in the Vaisheshika philosophy in a very broad way. So I think this is one fundamental thing which differentiates between the Eastern and Western civilizations, and ours is more dynamic, and our approach is also ecocentric, not anthropocentric. Like we are a part of the nature, when nature is at the center, and the human and other living and non-living beings are a part of the nature. Therefore, it makes us more sustainable in our approach in approaching science, not just for the sake of you know using things, utilizing things, or bringing a burden on the environment, which actually is an anthropocentric perspective, which is practiced by the Western civilizations even at present also. So I would say that philosophical approach is very much different, and why we are picking up things, in what sense we are picking up things. This understanding is also very much different in the West and the East. So I think this is the one important way to see things when we compare West and the East, that is the philosophical approach. Here we have multiple aspects of philosophies, starting from Dvaita till Advaita, and then it goes. But in the West, when we see, the approach is mostly biblical. And one more thing in the history of science we need to understand is, even before a child learns science or social science or humanities, he or she is first put into religion. Like we can say we are put into dharma because we learn to pray, we learn to respect, we learn honesty, we learn discipline, we learn time management at home. So all those things actually make up in knowledge generation at the later stage, because our mind mapping is such a way that what we learn first, that is religion, so that actually plays a very big role in everything which we do over the life. So if Bible or Quran teaches one way of enlightenment, then that is going to be the singular way of approaching everything. That is why I said, the West, it approaches empiricism as one big major thing for pursuing science. But in ours, it's the philosophical approach in dharma is very cyclic. We say the body is temporary, but we say that the Atman is eternal. No, so it starts from there. The time cycle, the time space coordination that happens, that is there in Bharat. No, it is more dynamic, it is more vibrant, and therefore we find we have different philosophies in approaching things towards life. And so gradually these methodologies also, take a shift, take a form in our pursuits of life. We believe that anything that happens is for good, right? It's a way to keep going, it's a way to keep going forward. So it's basically the philosophical approach in our life which we take, that that finds a way in everything.
So you talked about the difference between our civilization, that is the Eastern civilization, and the Western part of the world, and we'll come back to that. But I wanted your understanding on a point that just came to my mind, which was so there's a very famous interview of the Dalai Lama where he's asked if the scientific uh, questioning of the time, if the scientific experiments of the time dispel your beliefs or disprove your beliefs, where would you stand? And he very famously replies that, if all evidence points to that one singular fact, then I would alter my beliefs. I would make a new understanding of my way of life within those parameters. And I think that's a very important point that you've mentioned, which is the fluidity that we have. But what would you say how would you say that the progress of science would stand if science was to be, and it is now largely, a lot of communities do not believe in the progress of science at all. So, for example, today we do not believe that, the earth is flat, as many scriptures would tell you around the globe, or that it is the center of the universe, perhaps, or that of the solar system. Um, I mean, there are a lot of religions that would stand then against the very basic premise of science, right? So, what is the way forward from that? How do you dispel those notions? How do you break the chain of unscientific reasoning and not believing in the scientific evidence at all?
So unscientific reasoning in religion is more fear, fear of getting your heads rolled on. That actually is a fear. Okay, no, there's nothing to worry about it, but that exists. The fear of being killed. What happened to Socrates? What happened to Galileo? No, we have case studies in the past wherein the church had done that. These days, church does it, but definitely the masjids do. Okay, so when they say the earth is flat, it is flat. It may sound unscientific, but that is religiously approved, right? A person who goes to the church, who goes to the mosque in the morning, he will definitely be reading that the earth is round, it's not the center of the universe. Later on at school, at the college. But at the end of the day, if he goes to the church, if he goes to the mosque, he'll have to repeat that earth is flat. So it's basically fear of life that no things get unscientific. Again, unscientificity or unscientific approach can only be detected or deduced by scientific approach. So we have plenty of examples, plenty of research done to prove that things are unscientific. But then again, it's religion that will have to be more fluid, flexible, dynamic, and the followers will need to be more logical to compare between religion and science and choose the right thing that is always right. So in Sanatana Dharma, there's always a scope for rejuvenation. Anything that is wrong will be accepted as wrong. Just because it has been told by someone some time ago that this is it, doesn't mean that that is it. So Dalai Lama, in that sense, his approach is scientific. It's always good to correct oneself, not for sake of correction, but for sake of science. That's how I have to say. And if something is proven wrong, then I'm also ready to correct my views because my approach is scientific. Because what comes, if it is more scientific or even if it's more convincing, then definitely it has to be taken upon.
So, as we know, the Indian science, the historiography of Indian science, it's been shaped by a lot of, colonial and Eurocentric paradigms. So, how do you, through your book, reframe that narrative? And what all historiographical interventions did it take to bring about that change?
Okay. So when it comes to Indian science history, the facts and concepts have always been there. Just that it took us a lot of time to find it or to take it to bring it to the mainstream. It's always been there at the grassroots. People have been reading Indian science from the Vedic perspective, from the Upanishadic perspective. It has been always going on. It has been going on in our ashrams. It has been going on in our mutts. It has been going on in temples, gurukulas. Just that the modern education has recently started bringing it into the mainstream. There have been many instances in the recent past wherein students have asked me, sir, what we learn in school and what our grandparents teach us through stories in our homes is totally different. Why is it so? I said you should ask NCRT because NCRT has only recently started history snippets that are genuine and truthful. And having said that, when we say that Vasco da Gama invented or discovered the sea route to India, that is the history of theirs, European history. Have. It's not our history. We have been trading with the Rome since the Harappan times. We have been trading with Greece since the Harappan times. Okay. So, and when we say that certain history has come from the West, that it is their history. But we have recorded history even before that, even before Newton, even before anyone in the West. That no, our history it's already recorded. Just that the language is a barrier, or specifically when we are not learning anymore in the regional or local languages. That is one big reason why we are refusing to acknowledge that Indic science or Bharatiya science is very much ancient. So, in that sense, my attempt through the book was to bring about historiography, to bring about references that will corroborate Indian science from the perspective of modern methodologies, wherein you treat that as science. Definitely, Vedas, Upanishads, they all have several aspects of science which need to be decoded. It cannot be directly understood in one read. It needs to be researched upon because the linguistic science involved in the writings of Vedas, Upanishads is very much deep and wide. Unless and until we don't understand the grammar of science, Ashtadhyayi, agar we don't read Ashtadhyayi, we don't read the Vyakaran, then it's difficult for one to perceive what is scientific about in the Vedas. So it was really a big challenge for me to know at the beginning, but later on, through advisors from professors in JNU and through various other scholars, it was a little bit less challenging, but it was definitely challenging for me to go through the primary source. So I had to many often I had to refer to secondary sources to understand what history of science was about, and refer multiple sources to make sure that no things are there is no error in my interpretation of science. So definitely, if one person of anyone is in a position to uh, understand Sanskrit, understand other regional languages in India, then I think he's in a better position to understand science in a better way, Indian science in a better way.
So, sir, you emphasize upon the interdependence of both theory, which is Shastra, and then practice, which is Prayoga, in Indian scientific traditions. How did this symbiosis take shape, and how did it, shape the development of disciplines such as Ayurveda, Jyotisha, or Rasayan?
Okay. So when it comes to the hypothesis, because in science, hypothesis is something that comes first. Like you're perceiving something, and then you start to give it a framework of hypothesis that this could be, and even that hypothesis is based on some aspects of science, some understanding which you already have. So when it comes to Bharatiya science, I mean, since you asked about Rasayana Shastra, since you asked about Ayurveda, Jyotisha, so one important theory that comes here is about Panchamahabhutas. As we have these five elements of nature, that is Agni, Apaha or water, Prithvi or the earth, Vayu, and then we have this Akasha. Five matters are there. And again, this can be permuted into three when it comes to the Ayurveda, that is Tridoshas, Vat, Pitta, Kapha. And based on a very long understanding or observation or empirical observation by our rishis, by sannyasis, so we have this concept of Prakriti, right? So one Prakriti is that is surrounding us, and one Prakriti is within us. So we have an understanding that anyone who eats a food which is rich in Agni Matra, no, that causes generation of heat, then that causes generation of heatness within us, right? So, and anyone who consumes water, who causes the cooling of that fire aspect. So when we see that in our dietary plans, we are often advised to not consume curd or rice in the evenings, late evenings, because curd and rice are such a combination, which cools the body. So there is always a scope that late night, no midnight, you might get cold, you might get into uh, your lowering of temperature. So certain precautions and preventions are always there in Ayurveda to make sure that your inner prakriti is always in tandem with the outer prakriti. So unless and until your prakriti is balanced or your doshas are balanced, you're always said to be in a good health. Else, you're not to be in a good health, and then accordingly, medicines are given in Ayurveda to make sure that the prakriti is in balance. And it's always there that it was an household knowledge, Ayurveda, because in those days, prevention was one big way to understand what is our body and how is it linked with the outer prakriti. And again, when it comes to Rasayan Shastra, again there are certain chemical reactions which which we can see in the Rasayan Shastra, and that is also based on Panchamabhuta. You know, there also the role of earth is there. Various chemicals, they have their own properties. So these properties are all linked with these Panchamabhutas and how they are balanced. This comes. And when we talk about Jyotish Shastra, there also the role of planets come into play, the role of Earth's rotation come into play, the role of full moon, low moon, these come into play. And accordingly, certain things are given wherein we need to take the precautions, we need to take certain steps to improve our way of living. This also includes dietary consumption, this also includes our home interiors, the way, the direction in which from which the oxygen or the air flows into home, which room is suitable for which age group, which room needs to have the largest amount of sunlight, and what purpose can that room be used, the direction of setting of the room which is in tandem with the rotation of the earth. So all those things are linked with various aspects like Coriolis force. So it is there. These are some of the uh, case studies which I can at present say. So it's we have that hypothesis which can be linked with many of the aspects.
Okay. So, so moving further on this, I wanted to ask you that to what extent did Sanskrit serve as a medium of transmission, but at the same time, it was also responsible as a cognitive and structural framework for scientific knowledge? And how should contemporary scholars approach Sanskrit texts to get specific scientific insights from them?
So it is true that most of our knowledge systems are there in Sanskrit, but apart from that, they're also there in Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Marathi. Ample literatures are available in other language also. But since no, the Devanagari group of languages come from Sanskrit, it's mostly understood by the Devanagari group of languages is mostly spoken in the northern region, and therefore Sanskrit has a major role to play in Indian knowledge systems. And definitely, you know, there are also translations available in another language also. In down south, I mean, Sanskrit is not a major language that is used by people in understanding the scriptures. Of course, in all Indian languages, great amount of wisdom is definitely there. But if we see the major knowledge system or the major treatises at present, it's in Sanskrit. And definitely learning Sanskrit is important because my experience about interpreting Indian knowledge system by reading English was a little bit dull. There are not many words to express certain concepts of Sanskrit, certain concepts of dharma in English. I mean, even the vocabulary is not there. So we have many words that could possibly be the equivalent. One big example is dharma. In dharma, the contextually, it also talks about duty, talks about righteousness, it talks about spirituality, religion, it talks about many several things. But in English, if we say the equivalent word for dharma, then it could be religion, right? Else we'll have to explain it all the duty, righteousness, discipline, spirituality, religion. But in Sanskrit, dharma is just single word and it's contextually understood. There's no need to explain what dharma means in which context, because it's understood, because the linguistic science in Sanskrit is that advanced, right? And it has not changed for the last so many thousands of years. However, in English or in any other language we see, it is difficult to interpret that language which is even 100 or 150 years old. In today's world, it's not possible to for anyone to everyone understand Shakespeare in English, right? But it exists. That has changed. So learning Sanskrit could also be a scientific way of doing things. This is my approach. And because the way Maharishi Panini, he constructed Sanskrit through his Ashtadhyayi and through his other treatises, it is very much scientific in nature. It has algorithms in its base. It has arithmetic in its base. In the base of, I mean, linguistic knowledge, linguistic construction. So I think learning Sanskrit is very much important for understanding scientific knowledge.
So many modern critics, many scientists, they attempt to sort of separate metaphysics from empirical science. Yet, when we come to the Indian tradition of both scientific thought and otherwise, we see that this distinction is neither necessary nor is it productive. How do you respond to this? What are your views?
So in India, science and metaphysics, they go together, right? But in the West, post the Renaissance or post the maybe in the modern times, it has been segregated, right? And definitely, it's not that the Western science is not in tandem with Indian science, but they have one particular methodology which they cannot give up, and it is only through that they can approach science, right? They are on the way same way wherein which we have taken up. But for us, since there is also the scope of perception, the scope of hypothesis, the scope of perceiving things in a different way, then definitely that the role of metaphysics also comes up here. But in the Western world, religion is kept away from all aspects of knowledge, all aspects of education system. Politically correct, being secular, you can put it the way we want, but that is how the working of the West has been, and it's clearly visible also. But in Bharat, no, the concept of education itself is a divine thing, you know, because we say that knowledge is given to us, and we have many deities which wherein the giver of knowledge, the giver of wisdom. We have many deities, so it starts with metaphysics, right? And the way we perceive things, the way we see things in a divine form, no, that is what keeps us very close to spirituality, that keeps us very close to divinity. So it's not that we are politically wrong, we are also politically correct. Secularism also means to take things together. It doesn't always mean to keep things away. Secularism also means to take religion together.
So, could you also elaborate on the specific mechanisms through which colonial education policies have led to the marginalization and subsequent erasure of indigenous sciences?
Yeah. So when the East India Company started doing trade here, and they started, you know, making their forts, they had revenues and all. So at that time, when having, they started to gain understanding about India, the heights of the mountains, the depths of the rivers, the resources available here. It was all mapped through surveys, through big studies and all. But one thing which they could not understand is that what did the people of India read? what was the educational status here. So after the First War of Indian Independence, that is in 1857, the British started, or no, they initiated large educational surveys, be it in the Madras Presidency, be it in the Bengal Presidency, in the Punjab, in the Awadh region, or in the United Provinces, which is today's UP. They found out that every village had a school, and in that school, irrespective of caste, irrespective of gender, everyone came to study there, everyone came to read. And when the surveys also revealed about what they read, the British were astonished, because the education patterns was very much different in every place, and it matched the local requirements, the local traditions, local cultures. So this made them even more worried that if it is so much diverse, how is it that they're going to control the Indian polity? How is it that they're going to make the colony bigger? So it was at this time that the British policy of education came into being. They understood that these gurukulas, pathshalas, the mutts, the ashrams, they all ran with money that was sponsored by the traders who were also the alumni of these institutions. So the British increased the land tax, which was associated with the temples, associated with the gurukulas, and they increased the taxation of the traders, all those things. So this caused gradual eradication of funding, which came to the gurukulas, and they had a natural death, very slow and natural death. This is very much recorded. It is evidenced in many of the places, specifically the beautiful tree by Sri Dharampalji. He says that what the Islamic invasions could not do for 1,000 years, the British managed to do in just a fraction of 20, 30 years. And as if this was not enough, they replaced our decentralized rural education system with a Western based modern education system, mostly in the Bombay, Kolkata, Delhi, in Madras, and whose institutions are still there. If we see in all the presidencies, there still is a college in the name of Victoria, right? So this was replaced by a education system which would make us think like the English, but we are Indians who think like the English. This was the beginning wherein the education system saw the crumbling, and gradually, even Macaulay in his Minutes on Education, he says in two instances. One is that at the for the population who is in a verge of revolt, the best way to calm them down is to educate them the church way. And again, he says that let us create a large number of people who look like the Indians, but in thought wise, they think as according to us, and they think like the Englishmen. And this was one big strategy to make Indians lose the heat against the colonial pursuits and make us work according to their interests. And this happened, and we still have that colonial mindset, which we call Macaulay's way of education, Macaulay's children's. So all these terms comes from there. They had a very grand strategy, not by swords, but by pen and mind, and they were successful in that. That is how a very handful of Europeans know they could successfully rule this land, by making infights within us, by distracting that which made us think and made us feel that we are Bharatiyas. So that is how it happened. And it is only now that we are taking the attempt through the national education policy to bring things again into the main fold through Indian knowledge system, through Bharatiya thought process. We are not even in the race. We are just entering the race in resurrecting what was us.
So, sir, you mentioned the new education policy. You also advocate for a policy framework that recognizes and it reclaims indigenous knowledge systems. What institutional or curricular reforms would you prioritize to sort of initiate this process?
So to give this policy also scientific approach, I would say to firstly understand what are the knowledge systems that exists. There are certain knowledge systems which we have only an understanding of, that so and so knowledge existed, but we don't have the treatises, we don't have the scriptures at present with us to uh, to read upon, but definitely we have an understanding that so and so knowledge system existed. So that on one side, and again the existing knowledge framework, what we have with us, subject wise. If we say political science, then starting from Kautilya's Arthashastra, Vidhuraniti, so and so. If we say science, starting from Vaisheshika Darshan, Kanada's philosophy, Rasayana Shastra, there are many treatises on subject wise. So all those things needs to be tabulated, and we need to understand what exists as of now with us. Second phase is to select individually what could be my favorite subject. What is it that which I can read upon the Indian knowledge systems and have a basic understanding about it. And second thing is that we try to understand how this can be brought into the mainstream, not by throwing away the Western frameworks, but we need to work in such a way that the entire world is in a position to assimilate, to adapt the Western and Eastern philosophies. This is possible, but the West is not going to do it. But we can do it because that has been our culture, to assimilate the incoming knowledge, not to eradicate that is which is not us, but to assimilate everything that comes to us and to give it back in a assimilable form, in a form that is suitable for everyone in the world. So this could be one way of doing things. And second thing is the about, as I said before, about the languages. If we say that we will read and say everything in English, then that's not going to be possible. There are several languages that are much older than the English, and that has very in-depth knowledge systems, not only in India but also in other countries of the East, also some countries in the West, including the South Americas. No, they are not in limelight. That doesn't mean that they don't have a knowledge system that belongs to theirs, because every part of this global geography, they have their own system of knowledge, because that has been linked to their sustenance, to their livelihood. So it's always there, just that the internet doesn't speak about it, the hashtags don't speak about it, doesn't mean that they don't exist. So it's important to give a holistic approach to all type of knowledge systems that is prevalent in this world, and to find a tandem, to find a uniting aspect of these. And I'm sure it is always going to be the divine aspect that is going to bring us together, always. Just that we need to realize that it is there.
So Sabareesh, how do you envision the recovery of our Shastric traditions, specifically in contemporary Indian education, and not just in the form of heritage studies, but as living, evolving systems of knowledge, like systems which will last?
ये क्या है, समझ में नहीं आया.
I'm saying कि how do you जो हमारे जो शास्त्रों का जो ट्रेडिशन है हम उसको वापस हाउ डू वी ब्रिंग इट बैक इनटू हमारा जो एजुकेशन सिस्टम है ठीक है बट नॉट ब्रिंग इट बैक लाइक जैसे वी यूज्ड टू हैव संस्कृत हमारे उसमें फ्रॉम क्लासेस 6 to 8 ठीक है एंड इट वाज जस्ट डन क्योंकि इट वाज अ रिक्वायरमेंट कि यू नो तब वो 3 साल बच्चों को संस्कृत पढ़ाना है तो बच्चों ने उसका रट्टा मार दिया लाइक अगर अभी कोई पूछे कि मतलब एवरीवन नोज हाउ टू स्पीक संस्कृत वो जो रटे वाले वो जो टेंसेस थे पर किसी को संस्कृत नहीं आती है सो माय पॉइंट इज कि हम जो हमारे जो शास्त्रों का जो ट्रेडिशंस थे हम उन्हें अपने नॉलेज सिस्टम में वापस कैसे ला सकते हैं बट वापस मतलब ऐसे फॉर्मेलिटी के लिए नहीं लाइक हाउ डू वी ब्रिंग इट बैक कि वो हमारा एक लिविंग ट्रेडिशन में इवॉल्व हो
Okay. So, as I said earlier, it is always important in any knowledge system to bring about a tandem between theory and practice, right? If we know that this is a pen, like we say that this is a pen and इससे लिख सकते हैं, इसे draw कर सकते हैं, through this we can draw so and so things. But instead of that, without speaking a word, if a person just demonstrates it in a piece of paper, then it's much more understandable and it's imaginable as to what and all can be done with this particular thing, right? So this is as simple as that. Once we understand the importance of learning Sanskrit or importance of Ayurveda, importance of other shastras in a real life, if we understand the scientific aspects of these theories and its applicability in our real life, then half the job is done, frankly saying. And one example I would always say is about Ayurveda is that to have a basic understanding about this Prakriti, what we are made up of inside and what this entire universe is made up of is the same thing. So anything that can happen to this universe can happen to us also, right? In the winters, we feel cold because the exteriors are cold. In summers, we feel hot because the exteriors are hot. And since we are a working human body, so our temperature is even a bit slightly more than the outer side, right? That's the reason why we sweat. We sweat because our body tries to find a balance between the inner prakriti and the outer prakriti. So these days we drink cold drinks, we drink a lot of other Pepsi, Coca-Cola and all, but are they healthy for our mind, for our body? No. So in that sense, according to Ayurveda, what could be the coolants, what could be the cooling drinks or liquids that is also healthy? So we have panakam, we have drinks that is made out of lemon, ginger, tamarind and all that actually can replace our nutrients, our vitamins and all. No, that is also healthy. That is also good for digestion. So there is a long list of such aspects in Ayurveda that is good for your prakriti. And having said that, it is important to understand our prakriti, not necessarily the medicines of Ayurveda that suits you and suits Aditya. Not necessarily it suits me also, because my prakriti is different. My prakriti comes under kapha, right? So your prakriti could be coming under vata or pitta. So the medicines for you could be different. The so only a Vaidya could be in a position to determine, understand what is your prakriti, and he or she would prescribe the medicines accordingly. There is no single medicine for everyone in Ayurveda. I always quote the example of paracetamol कि बच्चों को भी बुखार आ जाता है तो 500 mg paracetamol, मुझे भी 500 mg देते हैं. That is the reason why so much of chaos is there in healthcare. सबको एक ही single प्रकार का antibiotics. I am saying it on record that allopathy is not in a position to read as depth as Ayurveda can read your body. Ayurveda has been working, there has been a working system for so many thousands of years. And today we stand in a position wherein R&D on Ayurveda or R&D in Ayurgenomics, R&D in ethnopharmacology is a very hot topic. Because Ayurveda has already proven over the thousands of years that certain herbal medicines can really cure. That is the reason why R&D research from multinational companies are concentrating more and more on traditional medicines. The best example is the patenting of turmeric, the patenting of neem, patenting of several other Indian herbs, Indian medicines, and later on they have been cancelled also, the patents, because they were existing knowledge. There is nothing novelty, there is nothing new about those patents. It was given illegally. It was a prior art. The knowledge system existed for thousands of years, practiced at the household level. CSIR had to submit 67 treatises to the US Patent Office to get the cancellation of neem and also turmeric, saying that this knowledge existed in our land for thousands of years. It is to this day practiced by every mothers and grandmothers of every home. We use turmeric as a part of a diet. That is when the patents were cancelled. And you won't believe the patents were applied by Indians who reside in US. the curcumin, which is the compound of antiseptic healing, which is there in turmeric, that was segregated, and the patent was given for curcumin. If you go to the traditional knowledge digital library TKDL, you will find very large list of medicines, which very large list of herbs for which patents were given, and later on the CSIR went and appealed to it, saying that it's a prior art. Then it was cancelled. Then an agreement was made between US Patent Office by the CSIR with US, European Patent Office, Japanese Patent Office, and all, saying that if any of the samples come from India with regards to plant, animal, and mineral, and if a patent is applied, kindly come and visit our library, digital library, and try to find yourself whether it's a prior art or not. So the library exists today. It's a digital library, TKDL, and it's a splendid library wherein you'll find so exhaustive list of herbs, minerals, animal products which have medicinal uses, and you will also find the medicinal therapies which is there, and it is also quoted from the respective treatises, etc. For example, Sushruta Samhita, Charak Samhita, the verse number is also quoted, saying that so and so medicines have been quoted, have been in use for centuries together, and it is mentioned as in current treatise. But thereafter also people don't understand, saying that Ayurveda is pseudoscience, right? It's matter is that we need to stop being rigid. We need to be dynamic, at least in the level of thinking, so that no, we could gain knowledge about what actually is ours. Ayurveda is a nature's way of treating oneself, right? So I think it is important for us to bring a relation between theory and practice, and this needs to be taught in schools. Yoga is another thing which in these days when students are having stress, anxiety, for them yoga could be the biggest healing factor. But are we really practicing it in the real sense? Yoga is taught in blackboards. I'm saying this is yoga. Yoga aisa karte hain, yoga aisa karte hain. In that place, is it not possible for the students to spend at least an hour in the school itself to learn yoga, which is happening in many schools? But is it happening really in that sense in which it should happen? That is a question. And if our generation is not going to do it, I don't think the next generation is really going to pick up. Because what our parents knew, we knew half of it. And what we know at present, probably the next generation is going to know much less than this. So it's important for the present times to reinvent methodologies in reciprocating the IKS. So yeah, that is what I have to say.
So there's a lot of ideological sensitivity about what you just said about pre-modern Indian scientific achievements. And there have been many, that is undeniable today. But what kind of reception has your work, received within the academic circles and the policy making communities?
So the best thing about academics is that even if they hate, no, they will accept it if the methodology is right. So mine was also the same experience. Especially when I postulated that such and such thing existed, of course, they made fun out of it, but no, they saw it with like, really? But then facts are facts, academics is academics, methodology is methodology, research is research. They accept or not, academics has to go on, and later on, they will find time to research and try to understand that yes, this is there. That is the reason why if the society doesn't accept, doesn't matter, academics has to accept it, because it has been proven, no, we have the facts with us to show, and to show that history matters. So even in the case of my book, there are many case studies which I mentioned in the book, That was initially when I spoke about the book at various platforms, it was seemingly controversial. But later on, so and so persons had to call me back and said that no, it was from our part that mistake has happened, that we couldn't research upon it. And just because of past habits, without undertaking research on it, they just made passing comments. I had faced that. But again, no, I knew about academic framework, I knew my strengths, so I stood by it. And I would urge every scholar to stand by what I'm saying, that no, methodology is methodology. Right? There is nothing to be afraid of academic methodology because it is time proven system. No, academic knowledge, it has a particular framework, it has a particular methodology to follow. So once we follow all those things, then things go smoothly. Yeah, if you're faltering on methodology, then things could get you in trouble, even legally also.
So, Sabrishi, in your engagement with classical texts, how do you navigate translation issues, contextual interpretations, and terminological accuracies? Like, how do you make sure कि वो एकदम is a foolproof so that no one comes back to you on it?
So yeah, so initially I had to read multiple sources, not just the primary sources, but also its commentaries, its descriptions, its transcriptions, all those things. And that is not easy to. It's not easy to just depend on primary source and to interpret things. Of course, definitely, since I don't. I mean, of course, I'm currently learning Sanskrit, but when the book was drafted, at that time, Sanskrit was I was not good at Sanskrit. So at those times, it was definitely secondary sources that helped me. And of course, since we have certain softwares which can easily find out facts, which can, instead of we, loitering into the textbooks, into the treatises, into the granthas, instead of that, there are certain websites which would directly fetch you the required things. Those things were helpful, definitely. And of course, I had to always reconfirm with my friends who are from the Sanskrit department, professors from Sanskrit department, to ensure that no things are going right. And again, Garuda Prakashan also played a good role in in trying to keep things upright through their editorial reviews, through suggestions, through corrections and all. So it was a great learning process, but definitely, the language was a barrier, and it's a barrier which we have brought upon ourselves. I think that barrier is something which needs to be worked upon so that the future generation is not gifted the same barrier.
So, when we talk about Indian text today, we see that there is a lot of uh, concern. There is a lot of perhaps uh, there are fights that erupt about it, and a lot of that is because of presentist reading. Either it is, there's a lot of romanticized glorification, or it's complete and utter dismissive reduction of the text. So while writing your work, while writing your book, how did you go about understanding and writing about these historical scientific achievements?
So, no, in today's political India, we have a terminology called chest thumping, right? So chest thumping can be done for like a few seconds, but उसके आगे करेंगे ना तो दर्द होगा. तो academics में भी ऐसे ही है, chest thumping जो करता है उनके लिए लंबा समय दर्द होगा. Because chest thumping, it not necessarily it will bring out facts. It's about boasting ki what we were, what, not necessarily it's a secondary source also. It's maybe a tertiary or fifth source of information which comes through the WhatsApp and all those things. But definitely people like that. But behind that chest thumping, if we go the previous thing, then somewhere academic perspective will come out. Right? When someone says that we knew surgery in the greatest way possible, then the academic perspective or the research perspective is this, that Charak Samhita, Shushu Samhita, it talks about surgery. Historical fact is that in the year 1793, a surgeon in Pune, he demonstrated surgery on a Parsi soldier on his nose. And this was witnessed by two British medical surgeons, published in Madras Gazette in the year 1795, and later on the next year published in the Gentleman magazine in the year 1796. And then that is how the West came to know about the entire aspect of surgery that is practiced in India. So someone who reads all these things, he would definitely put it in a glorified way. No, that is the common way of putting things, because the common man doesn't know how to represent these facts, because of the circle among him would also want to hear something that is in a glorified way. But not necessarily behind every glorifying statements there is a history, there is a academic perspective, but definitely somewhere or the other way things have that ratio, that proportion, or that lineage. I'm trying to say that which is primary source, secondary commentary happens, then the tertiary commentary also may happen. Maybe the fourth or fifth stage, it's mostly glorification, which has some aspects of truth derived from the primary, secondary, or tertiary. Right? That is how society works. You give press release to someone, they will write it in their own way and publish it. The person who publishes it has his own perspective. The person who reads it has different perspective, and the person who has read and then who explains it differently. The fifth person who is listening to it, no, it's mostly like glorifying statement. So that is how it happens. Even HR management also know there is an experiment saying that no, they all talk in the ears to know that what the last person listens. So it's kind of that way. But dismissive reduction is something, that needs to be worked upon. Dismissive on what grounds? If it's on academically logical grounds, then that is well and fine. But if it's based on ideological dismissions, then that should not be accepted. Because behind every knowledge generation, there is a question. And ideology cannot be a barrier in the quest for truth. So it is important to understand that dismissive reduction needs to be thought out, right? And dismissive reduction cannot be based on the apprehension, cannot be based on the understanding that this is romanticized glorification. It has to be logically treated, it has to be curated, it has to be thought about, it has to be discussed, debated, and then if they find this is like academically dismissible, then that is acceptable. Else, like dismissive reduction needs to be treated toughly.
So Sabrish, like the final question is that are you currently working on any continuation of the same project, like perhaps a deeper study into the discipline, or are you mentoring new students and scholars in the same field?
Yeah, currently I'm pursuing my postdoctoral fellow at the Inter
Hmm.
University for Yogic Sciences. So it's in Delhi. And my research area is in the area of Tantra. So my PhD was in the area of Tridoshas, scientific validation of Tridoshas. And so there in Tridoshas, when it comes to Vatpit Kapha, so there it's about our physiological body. And now in my PDF, it's about Tantra. So it's about the psychological aspect of our body. So Vigyan Bhairav Tantra is a treatise wherein Lord Shiva, he teaches yoga to Ma Parvati. He explains 112 methods of yoga, starting from simple breathing to pranayama to bhambri to kundalini, and then he goes on with so many techniques. So I'm trying to categorize, I'm trying to classify the procedures or the techniques which Lord Shiva teaches us. And as a part of the empirical research, I'm trying to understand the our body brain signals that is emitted during meditation. It's classified as alpha, beta, gamma waves. and it is said that no, in deepest form of meditation is equivalent to the highest form of creativity. So at that point of time, what is the physiological conditions of a body? How does our heat force itself? What are the what are the frames of our brain signal that is happening? So yeah, I would say that it's a continuation, but it's more precise, it's more methodical, it's more empirical than what happened in the past. And I think definitely learning is this way. This is how we learn new things. We are getting more precise, and that is how new knowledge is generated. So yeah, kind of I can say that no, my current working is a continuation of my previous learnings and experiences.
You had mentioned your research on Tantra the last time we had met. You had said that, like, so how are the sources and all coming along?
About the
Because
vegan.
because that is something we talked about the last time, no? When you had said ki the sources portion is the part where, like, थोड़ा एक वो loop है.
I mean, your voice is not clear. The early questions I could follow because I had the right to follow it. So yeah, this question, no, it's no, your voice is not
Okay.
clear. Repeat plus.
I'm saying ki how are you managing the sources when it is coming to Tantra? Because the last time we had met, you said ki uh, no one else has covered it the way you're covering it. So, जो sources हैं, like you are basically forming the sources for other people.
Yeah, yeah. So tantra is one thing which has been no, which has been really, I would say, it has been mutilated by the modern narratives. It has been really mutilated by the modern narratives. And another treatise which has been equally mutilated is Kama Sutra. People try to give it a erotic sense to Kama Sutra, just by forgetting that the initial 13 chapters or 12 chapters is all about homemaking. It's about family, it's about textiles, it's about jewelry, it's about dietary, all those things. And the same way, Tantra is also being misrepresented on all lines. One thing that is important to understand is that Tantra, it has different aspects. It has different way of interpretations. It has different approaches in it. And my particular research is about classifying it and categorizing it in a scientific way. And definitely, as I said earlier, academic perspective is something no which need not be afraid of other things. So I'm trying to give it an academic framework which is mostly not available elsewhere. And because I'm getting this response from my field visits, from people whom I'm discussing with, because they say that not everyone takes this approach. Because anyone who researches on tantra is seen differently. But definitely, as an academician, I need not be afraid of such accusations or such approaches because my framework is academic. It's not a it's not a normal or ordinary framework wherein we see tantra as a practicing method or we are debating about its efficacies. We are debating about what is happening right or wrong in it. As an academician, I'm seeing tantra as it is by keeping away all the controversies, all the problems surrounding it. I'm seeing tantra the way Lord Shiva gave it to us. So nothing to be worried of. And I think every academician would accept what I'm saying. The role of an academician is to take off the evils and to try to bring uh, to the society what is right.
Thank you so much, sir. The session was packed with knowledge. I think all the questions that we had in our minds have been answered, and they've been answered so well. So thank you so much for being with us and for taking out time. Um, the book was, of course, an amazing read. and I recommend that all of our viewers do read A Brief History of Science in India by Dr. Sabareesh. It is an amazing book, and it will induce some manner of scientific thought in you as well as a reader. So thank you so much, sir, once again for being with us today and for answering all our questions. Thank you to our viewers for listening in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.